Just one more second.
And is there going to be a chat function where somebody's going to collect question Q&A or whatnot?
Yep, I will collect questions as they come in, and then at the end, if we have time, I can give them to you.
Great. Thank you.
April 8th and April 16th. Okay, I think I'm just about ready. I'll close myself off. Sorry.
Hi, everyone that's trickling in. We're going to leave just a couple minutes for folks to arrive. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for attending the last final keynote speech of this year's LGBTQ Health Month. My name is Caroline Scott. I'm a second-year medical student here at WashU, and I'm one of the outgoing co-presidents of LGBTQMed, which is our organization among the medical students. And I wanted to give a big thank you to the WashU School of Medicine Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, or the ODEI, as well as the School of Medicine's Office of Diversity Programs, or ODP, as well as OutMed, which is the LGBTQ organization for faculty and trainees affiliated with WashU and BJC. I just wanted to give a big shout out to all those organizations for helping us put on this year's event. If any of you have not come to any of the other LGBTQ Health Month events, this used to be a 1 week long event just for the medical students, but we figured there would be no better time than COVID to expand this programming to include all of the WashU School of Medicine, and including BJC, and just for the whole community. So we really appreciate you coming to today's talk. Just a few notes before we get started. I want to let everyone know that we have been able to purchase pronoun pins as well as rainbow caduceus white coat pins or lanyard pins, and those will be you can request. There will be a Google form sent out after this to all the attendees of today's talk, and you can either schedule a pickup at the ODP, which is in the FLTC, or you can request one through delivery through campus mail. So we really appreciate everyone coming, and that's kind of our little token to you all. And finally, so you can ask questions through the chat function through Zoom. And we will just leave all those questions until the end. If there's enough time, we'll just ask those questions at that time. So feel free to add any questions in there, and there is an option to ask them anonymously. So without further ado, I am so thrilled to introduce our speaker. Dr. Juno Obedin-Maliver is an assistant professor of obstetrics and gynecology, as well as epidemiology and population health at Stanford University School of Medicine, who practices full spectrum obstetrics and gynecology clinical care, and she strives to advance scientific knowledge and health equity through her research as well. So her research and educational efforts focus on promoting health equity and well-being for sexual and gender minority people, which include but are not limited to lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and questioning people, also known as LGBTQ+. So Dr. Obedin-Maliver is the co-director of the PRIDE study, which you can see more at pridestudy.org, which is a multi-site online national prospective cohort of sexual and gender minority individuals, which is based at Stanford. And she has many peer-reviewed publications and NIH and PCORI funded awards on SGM health. And she's helping to author the next version of the WPATH, or World Professional Association for Transgender Health, Standards of Care. Dr. Obedin-Maliver has also been active in health policy, including helping to legally redefine consideration of sexually intimate partner status and to remove the Medicare non-coverage determination ruling on gender-affirming surgeries. So we are absolutely thrilled to have Juno here, and without further ado, take it away.
Thank you so much, Carolyn, for that kind introduction, and to all of the folks who've helped make it possible to be here, to all the folks in the audience. I wish I could be there in person, but it is kind of great that I'm talking to you from San Francisco, and we can still make this possible. So I will be talking about my largest project, the PRIDE study, and it's really wonderful to be back in community with Washington University. I was physically there 2 years ago talking about the PRIDE study, and we were in a different place. And so talking about some of the genesis of our work and where we've come to now. So I don't have many disclosures in that there's not financial conflicts of interest, but I do receive funding from various institutes, as Carolyn mentioned, NIH, PCORI, and others. I do some consulting work, et cetera. And I always like to start and say, I am a clinician investigator. I do research. I take care of and support people in their health as a physician, but I also come to this work as a member of the LGBTQ+ community. And so this is personal and professional, and that's what keeps me motivated in this. So I use she and her pronouns. I'm a cisgender queer woman, masculine of center, and this is my family. So, or part of my family, my partner, Teresa, and my kiddo, Emma. If you hear some banging at the door, that's what's going on. He's home from school, and we all have many roles. And I think that's actually important to acknowledge in research and in life, that we bring all of our identities to the fore. All right, so today I'll be talking a little bit about SGM people and health disparities, just really as a background, but there's so much to learn and so much more to study, and that's what we're hoping to do through the PRIDE study, so I'll talk about that, as well as our community engagement philosophy and how we do that in the PRIDE study and some of what we're doing in the future. So although you've been having a couple of other lectures and hopefully many other points of education and engagement around health and health disparities, I will talk a little bit about that. So the first thing is just definitions. Likely most people here are comfortable with the terms, LGBTQ or LGBTQ plus, many others, LGBTQIA2S, and not to exclude any communities, but there is growing understanding that this umbrella of folks who don't just fit into the, heterosexual and cisgender buckets, as it were, is actually quite large and quite diverse. And so in medicine and in academia, there's been a move to use this umbrella term sexual and or gender minority people, or SGM. That's not really used by most folks in the community, but so you'll see this, kind of growing difference in academia and in medicine, which doesn't always line up with how folks are talking about themselves. We always want to, of course, respect people's own language and learn, and language changes throughout time. Now, one of the first questions always when I'm talking about SGM people, LGBTQ plus people, and I'll use those terms interchangeably, even though they're not exactly the same thing, is, how big is this population? And the most accurate answer to that is we actually don't know. But there are some good estimates, and a recent study actually out by Gallup. So, they call people up and they ask, gosh, do you identify as LGBTQ? Or actually they just say LGBT. And when they did that in 2020, they found that 5.6% of US adults do. So that's pretty large, okay? And then it is different depending on generation. So Gen Z folks, 1 in 6 people are LGBT. So that's almost like 16%. Okay, and then when you break that out, it's different. So if you're looking at the slides, here on the bottom, kind of green boxes, differences among folks who are bisexual, gay, lesbian, and trans. And when we look at Gen Z, so the youngest kind of generation that was asked, 1 in 6 people are SGM and 1 in 55 are trans. Now, we think that's a floor and not a ceiling, because not everyone feels comfortable, answering on a random digit dialing, call that they're LGBT. And what we do know, and this has been asked and looked at, is not unique to a particular race, ethnicity, income bracket, or education level. And we do think some of the difference in ages and generations is about comfort and disclosure, but it may also be about changing notions of norms, and there's more work to do there. But it is a challenge that we don't know really precisely where, how many LGBTQ plus people there are and where they live. And part of the challenge is that there isn't comprehensive data collection on sexual orientation and gender identity in major instruments of administrative assessment as well as scientific assessment. So when I mean administrative assessment, I'm talking about the census. That pertains to health and resource allocation, as well as things, as well as other studies like the National Health Interview Survey, American Communities Survey, the Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance Survey. Some of these are starting to incorporate sexual orientation and gender identity, but not comprehensively. And that's a real problem, because we're really missing the data that we need to understand health disparities and actually also resiliencies and ways that LGBTQ plus people may be thriving in ways that cisgender straight folks may not be. So one of the other factors that has influenced the fact that we really think about sexual and gender minority people as having health disparities and being understudied, underserved, and vulnerable to poor health is the view, and within medicine and unfortunately larger society as well, that homosexuality and more broadly being an LGBTQ plus person, but homosexuality was defined as a disorder just until 1973. And I would venture to guess there are people on this call who were alive then. I can't see all of your faces and don't know your ages, but this is in our contemporary lexicon, and certainly gender dysphoria and or being a transgender person or gender minority person is still perceived in many ways and as a disorder, even though that is it's just a diversity of experience. And partially that is complicated because it helps people attain medical support and services they need for gender affirmation. But unfortunately, if you're listing something as a disorder, then that shapes how people are viewing individuals. So this has also in science been really problematic as there's been a hunt for a gay gene or trans gene in order to fix people. And then sadly, there's a really destructive practice of what we call conversion or reparative therapy, which does not repair anything, but actually can lead to a lot of trauma and poor health outcomes. So in this context, what we see is unfortunately a significant health disparities. So despite the fact that there are a lot of gaps in our understanding of science, we know that discrimination in medicine and in society at large limits healthcare access. So in the 2015 transgender survey, which is the largest survey of trans and gender diverse people that has been conducted thus far, over 27,000 people, we found that a third of individuals had one or more negative experiences with a healthcare provider in the past year. And that was different according to people's race and ethnicity. And so we see the intersection of different identities and experiences really can overlay and overlap to shape how somebody experiences their healthcare and whether they have access or not. And in that same vein, almost, excuse me, a little more than a fifth did not see a health provider due to fear of mistreatment in the past year. And so, if you had a bad experience and you fear mistreatment, that may end up that you are later to seek care, have more advanced disease or pathology, or just not getting your healthcare, preventative care needs taken care of, and can lead to worse health outcomes. We unfortunately can't demonstrate all those health outcomes yet because of the lack of data collection that I talked about, but all of the writing is there to say that these situations are combining to make LGBTQ plus people vulnerable to poor health. One thing that has been really well demonstrated is that unfortunately LGBTQ plus people are more likely to smoke than the general US population. And some of that is really tied to the fact that SGM people were specifically targeted by tobacco companies as a target population. And there were campaigns really looking at LGBTQ plus people and getting them addicted to tobacco and smoking. Some other health disparities, because of societal stigma and discrimination, we see poor mental health outcomes for SGM people, especially among gender minorities. And that is not because of anything that is inborn or wrong at all with the experience of having a different experience or presentation of gender. It's about living in a world where at every turn there is an societal expectation of what somebody's gender will be and how that does or does not line up with their sex assigned at birth and what that gender presentation will be. And so what that translates into is that 41% of transgender people report having attempted suicide compared to 1.6% of the general population, which is just staggering in terms of a health crisis. And that is because of this discrimination and stigma. Additionally, and in addition, youth experience homelessness because they're kicked out of their home or leave for their own safety in disproportionate rates if they are LGBTQ plus, and as opposed to being cisgender and straight. So 40% of the youth homeless population are comprised of LGBTQ plus people compared to 7%. Compared to 7% of the general youth population being LGBT. Now, we have newer data, I just said 15%. So, these need to be updated, but sadly, it is just disproportionate. Now, some of these things come together to our current situation. So, COVID is obviously top of mind for everyone. It is affecting all of our lives, but there are reasons why the LGBTQ plus population is maybe, and we, from all the signs, disproportionately impacted by COVID. So barriers to healthcare that I've talked about. So you may have signs or symptoms or want to be tested or vaccinated, but be concerned about discrimination, and sadly, rightly so. There's also more housing, job, and food instability, higher tobacco use, higher cancer rates, and higher HIV rates, all of which can combine to make it more likely to acquire COVID and then have worse outcomes with it. We can't fully demonstrate that, again, because of the lack of data collection. So with all of that in mind, we started the PRIDE study to try to fill in some of these data gaps and health outcomes. So I'm going to play a quick video here for you to introduce you to the PRIDE study.
Are we good with the sound? Okay.
I'm a Russian-speaking, gay, Catholic,
Chinese, Mexican,
Latina,
White male,
biracial,
bisexual,
trans woman,
lesbian,
Colombian American.
I kept trying to come out to my parents, but they really don't understand.
I mean, I like being a lesbian.
I don't wish I was straight at all. I think that this makes me special.
And especially in this time and age, being gay is seen as an asset.
You know, the person who really is most accepting of my transgender identity is my mom.
She came at me with a knife and screaming that she would rather see me dead than living the life that I was living.
I knew that there were aspects of who I was and how I was in the world that were not welcomed in the medical world.
When I visit a new doctor, it's always a challenge.
I had colon cancer about 10 years ago.
One of the first things I feel like I have to do is kind of dispense with this notion that I'm straight.
So what are you using for birth control? And I said, nothing.
You don't want to go into a clinic and then end up having to educate your own doctor.
And she just stopped and she looked at me like I'm an idiot.
That's what they're there for. They should already know.
You know, going to the doctor should be a safe place.
I try to avoid situations where I feel like I'm going to be stigmatized or discriminated against, but I know that that is something that I can't always control.
Our community has gone through an enormous number of hard things over many, many years.
Thing after thing hits us, and we always come back.
I mean, really the community provides, in many ways, everything.
We really need to join together as the diverse and dynamic communities that we are and help to transform the health system together.
I always feel that if my struggles can help someone else not have to go through the same thing I went through, then it hasn't all been in vain.
So that was a video we made a few years ago, and it's still very true. It speaks to kind of the underlying impetus as to why we created the PRIDE study. So the PRIDE study was founded by myself and my dear friend and colleague. Some folks call him my work husband, Mitchell Lunn. He's a nephrologist at Stanford with me. And we really understood this, there's this health disparities, lack of access to healthcare, but really this absence of data. And we said, look, we're clinicians, we're researchers, let's start a study that helps fill in these research gaps and answer this underlying question, how does being a sexual and or gender minority person influence your physical health, your mental health, and social health? And certainly, how does that illustrate health disparities, but also getting to this place of resiliencies, differences, things that might be going great, in terms of surviving and thriving. So a PRIDE study, any study needs a good acronym, and population, our acronym is Population Research in Identity and Disparities for Equality. So we really wanted to, from the get-go, really center the community and center community voices and flip academia on its head and really make sure that we were incorporating participants from end to end. So that's really kind of the basis of this, is that at the bottom, that participants are involved in every step of the process. And we really wanted to center the fact that we think participants know best. LGBTQ plus folks know best about their health and about their struggles, and that we wanted to keep always grounding ourselves in that and give back to the community in every way that we could, not just at the end, not just with a research manuscript that lives and dies in a medical journal, but rather throughout the process, such that it felt good. And so part of that was making sure that what we're doing is easily accessible and low burden, and acknowledges the struggles of the LGBTQ plus community, not just in the health outcomes, but also in how the research is done. So in terms of design, it's a national online study. It's prospective, meaning looking forward, and longitudinal, kind of the same thing in that it goes forward. Dynamic cohort study. So dynamic means that people can come and go. We hope they come and stay, and we're hoping to go on for many decades. And right now, the inclusion criteria is being a sexual and or gender minority, self-identified. There's no test that people take. Excuse me. Being at least 18 years of age or older, living in the US, and currently right now comfortable reading and writing in English. We hope to do two things in the future when we're able, bring that age down, as well as being available in other languages. Two main phases to the study. The first phase started in 2015, went from 2015 to 2017, was on an iPhone only. It was an app that we developed, and there we really generated research questions and health priorities with the community. So we had some health surveys as well as what we call a community forum, and that helped us design phase 2, which is where we're in now, and we hope to stay in for many years. So longitudinal data collection, which we launched in 2017 on a custom web-based platform that's accessible from any internet-enabled device. It has a participant profile, demographics, medical and surgical history, medications, and the cornerstone is really annual health questionnaires that get released every year around late May, early June, and as well as ancillary or topic-specific studies. And we've recruited 21,700 participants roughly, and those are different folks than that 18,000 from our community listening pilot. So in phase 1, the community listening phase, we really trialed things out, and as I said, developed phase 2, but we know that not everyone uses an iPhone. So, but it was really helpful in phase 1 to understand, can we recruit folks? There was a lot of concern that, like, gosh, LGBTQ plus people just don't want to participate in research, and that's clearly not true. People were really excited, and also just to get a sense really of the diversity of the LGBTQ plus community. So one of the big take homes was just how diverse people are in terms of the sexual orientation and gender identity. So with people having, a whole array of identities and multiple identities, both in terms of gender identity and sexual orientation, 17% of people having more than one sexual orientation, for example, and 6% of folks having more than one gender identity. And we also had this robust engagement in our community forums. So we asked people and we said, what do you care about? You know, post a topic you would like researchers to study about LGBTQ plus community. So we said, look, you know, even though I, Juno, am an OBGYN, Mitch is a nephrologist, you know, maybe people don't want to learn more about their sexual and reproductive health. Maybe they don't want to know about hypertension. Maybe they want to learn about other things. And there was a vigorous engagement in that. And some of the top health concerns were these, but there were many. So depression and anxiety, teen suicide, the role of family support, violence among trans women, is particularly kept coming up, trans women of color, which we all as a community really need to think about and change that situation. So the role of race and ethnicity in coming out, so intersecting identities, and how specific LGBTQ plus competent training for healthcare providers. And then this was a really interesting one that, you know, sort of none of us predicted, but how high school sex ed or school sex ed really influences the lives of the health and well-being and future lives of LGBTQ plus people. So that all went into, as I said, you know, building our phase 2, which is where we're at now. And really it came from, you know, recognizing there's just, you know, technical limitations of doing everything on your phone, but obviously not everyone has an iPhone. And we developed that way because we had some resources and a developer who could do that and did it for pro bono and all of these things, but we really wanted to be able to reach more people. Okay, and so we built the web-based platform. And for those of you who are interested in the nitty-gritty of what that web-based platform is and how we built it, and we built it because we wanted it to look and feel different and to have different technical capabilities than what we were seeing out there in the market. So this paper is available for those of you who really like to know, you know, about our microservices container architecture. And that's kind of all I know about that because I am not the tech developer on this team. But we really wanted to create this research infrastructure to conduct this online longitudinal study and show that we were effective at recruiting diverse folks in terms of sexual orientation and gender identity, and that, you know, basically a third of our population are gender minority people, and that technology can really assist in recruitment, retention, and data accuracy. And not just for LGBTQ plus people, but we really think that this is more of where research should be going generally. Research and medical care should be going generally. So just a peek at, you know, what this looks like. This is the research platform. This is what somebody would see when they come and log into their profile. You have activities and a dashboard, surveys, as well as this component of insights where you can see, you know, other participants, how many other participants in the cohort are just like you. We also, you know, built in various features to make it have a look and feel like this is a study that's built by, for, and with LGBTQ plus folks. So we think we're the only, you know, study that has like flying unicorns and other, you know, rainbows and all these other things. And some of that is to, you know, is to add some levity, but also recognition within the community. And this is actually published in one of our papers. So we think we're the only, you know, paper that has a unicorn published in a medical journal. And, you know, some of the, you know, the cornerstone that I mentioned of our study is the annual questionnaire. So we cover number of topics. It's something, when you print out the annual questionnaire, it's something like 700 pages or something. Now, it's not that arduous to a participant, but there's a lot of branching logic and whatnot, and things like physical health in terms of cancer screening, sleep, pregnancy, mental health, you know, any diagnoses people have, challenges, substance use, but also social health, like people's religion and spirituality, how comfortable they feel in their community, parenting, employment, these other pieces. And we really have this principle of taking standard questionnaires from other studies, and then so that we can compare to other studies, but also really thinking about and working with our community advisory boards to make sure that it's appropriate for LGBTQ+ people. And this has been well received, and we're starting to now put out more research. So when I was here, here/there in Washington University 2 years ago, we didn't have the number of studies that we have now. So this is one that came out last year, where we looked and said, right now, many of the current instruments that look at problematic drinking say, gosh, that's 4 drinks on one occasion for women, and that's 5 drinks on one occasion for men. What does that look like for trans folks, for gender diverse folks? And so this study really helped us find what instrument would work best. And this is kind of this specific study is interesting and good, and we hope will inform care, but it's also this thinking about, how do these things really apply to communities that haven't been considered in other studies, and how do we take the experiences from the community of like, gosh, I just don't fit into those buckets. So where, how do I get care if I am trying to deal with my problematic drinking, or do I have problematic drinking? These kinds of questions. We also, try to stay contemporary. So we last year, and sadly it has been a full year, but right at the end of March, we released a survey about the impact of COVID, and we found, because we're a longitudinal survey, we were able to administer a tool called the PHQ-9 that looks at depression, as well as some other tools, and look at and compare to people, people's experiences before COVID, and look at depression and anxiety changes among sexual and gender minority people coinciding with the onset of COVID. And we found that for people, there was an overall increase in depression and anxiety scores, but this was mostly among people who did not have baseline depression or anxiety. So maybe not totally surprising, but really starting to say, gosh, how is this affecting this particular community that has, because of stigma and discrimination, a higher baseline risk of depression and anxiety. We've also done a lot of work on disordered eating in sexual and gender minority people, led by one of my colleagues at University of California, San Francisco. And so what he did was administer this kind of standard eating disorder questionnaire to the whole PRIDE study. And then we've been looking at, how do our different communities, so transgender men and women, how do cisgender gay men, how do cisgender lesbian women, how are these different communities kind of scoring on these standardized instruments? And it's really been previously unstudied. So if somebody showed up, cisgender lesbian woman showed up to a clinic and was being assessed for an eating disorder, it was unclear, how would this compare, and is this an appropriate tool? And so giving clinicians a tool to help them think about providing, clinically accurate and culturally sensitive, culturally humble care. Another piece that is really near and dear to my heart that I've been leading is thinking about the sexual and reproductive health of sexual and gender minority people, with an emphasis on transgender and gender diverse people. So we know that, for example, transgender men and other people who have uterus, ovaries, and tubes can get pregnant, want to get pregnant, can build families through pregnancy, but also may not want to can get pregnant, but may not want to carry a pregnancy to the point of having a child. And so that's really been understudied. And so we looked at the pregnancy intentions and outcomes among transgender, non-binary, and gender expansive people. And this is the largest transgender and gender expansive people assigned female or intersex at birth. And this is the largest study thus far of 1,700 trans and gender expansive people looking at pregnancy rates. Now, it's not a population-based sample, so we can't say, gosh, this 12% of folks who had at least one pregnancy is kind of a population number, but it gives us some idea that, yes, people get pregnant, and yes, some people want to continue that pregnancy, and some people want to have future pregnancies. 11% of people wanted to, and a lot of people felt, quote unquote, at risk of having a pregnancy. And another study we did, looked at the unmet need for contraception. So these are all trying to fill in these profound data gaps that we have, so that, my colleagues in obstetrics and gynecology, for example, can look at these data and say, wow, am I prepared as a prenatal care provider to take care of somebody who is a man and happens to have a uterus and is pregnant and wants to continue that pregnancy or wants to stop that pregnancy? I have these two pictures here. These are both two couples where a man in the couple is pregnant, and I think it's the picture on your left. Tristan is pregnant with his, I believe, husband Biff, and then on the right, Caden and Dominique, and Caden is pregnant there. And just to say, so these are two couples of men. In each of the couples is a trans man and a cis man. And to also note, we anticipate that there's also differences in terms of their experience of being pregnant, not just because they're men in the world of two male couples, but also because Keenan and Dominique are Black, and Biff and Tristan are white. And so how does race and other identities intersect? And unfortunately, we need just so much more data, and we need comprehensive data collection to get at this. And so that's why we say the PRIDE study is just part of the picture. Right now, our cohort is predominantly white. It's over 80% of folks are white, educated. We do have a good age range, and we are all over the country. We're always working on that. We're working with our community advisory boards to help with that. But we need everybody who is doing research to really be asking good questions about sexual orientation and gender identity, so that we are filling in the gaps. So when you look on PubMed in terms of LGBT articles published in the past few years, you can see there's been an incredible increase over time. And the PRIDE study is just part of that. And so you all have a part to play in that if you are involved in research and certainly clinical care, in terms of generating insights and helping to solve these really vexing health inequities. So part of, I've mentioned that we are really center this experience of getting people involved in every step of the way. And, how do we do that? Well, part of that is a philosophical approach of really wanting to have activities that excite and involve people in the project and the research efforts that's based on our values and principles. And instead of being transactional, oh, do this for me, just fill out this survey, we try to be in this transformational space of like, let's create something new and better together. And let's really take seriously, the insights and experiences of our participants. And this is guided by those values that I mentioned earlier, that things are low burden, easily accessible, community engaged, our participants know best, and that we work to give back to the community. And we operationalize that through our community advisory committees. We have a 32-member community partner consortium. We have ambassadors that go, our community members that go out and talk to people. And if people have, questions or concerns, who are these folks, doing this study, these kinds of things, they are folks that can be a point of contact. And then, of course, we consider our study participants as really integral collaborators in this project. So these are some of the fabulous people that really dedicate their time and energy, our advisory committee, as well as our ambassadors, to helping realize this process. And some of our community partners who are very, diverse and distinct around the country. So many of you might know the Human Rights Campaign, the blue square with the yellow equal sign. They have, thousands of people around the country with millions of dollars a year, whereas very different than some of our smaller organizations that may have 3 or 5 people. And so we have customized collaborative agreements with each of them to figure out, what's the best way for you and your constituents to partner with the PRIDE study. Some one really community engagement example. There's many, but we recognize that in doing the PRIDE study that, this is not how academics were taught to do research. We're not taught, how to engage with the community at every step of the way. We're taught, how to check and see, is this a normally distributed population, or what's my research question, these kinds of things. But it's a whole different skill set. And so our community advisory committee felt like they were, answering some of the same questions and needed to, help guide researchers in the same way over and over. And so they created this guidance on community engaged research that's specific for collaborating investigators called our ancillary study investigators about when they're creating their applications to work with and collaborate with the PRIDE study. And so these are the kind of things that we do to try to help make things better and both within and beyond the PRIDE study and fill in the training gaps here. We also do things like community listening sessions. So going around the country and saying, hey, what is your experience of being involved in research? What are your opinions about what we should be doing and what research in general should be doing? What are your barriers to participating, and what's like your sources of health information? So this really gives us that on the ground insights from LGBTQ plus community members and enables us to adjust our engagement approaches and things like dissemination. So like I said, our manuscripts don't just like live and die in medical journals. So in terms of the future, I mean, there's so much we could say about that, but briefly, like we have this mechanism called our ancillary studies, where we know that our annual questionnaires, which are about 45 minutes to an hour, once a year, they have a lot of questions in them, but not everything. And we are sitting on thousands of research insights that we as a team, a small team, can't study just by ourselves. And so we want to collaborate with researchers around the country. And so some of that is analyzing existing data, and sometimes that's about novel data collection. So things like biospecimen, like novel data collection in terms of surveys, but now what we're starting to move into is biospecimen collection. So can we, for example, collect blood remotely from PRIDE study participants and look at things like hormones or indicators of stress, intervention studies, for the folks, for example, who smoke within the PRIDE study, can we work with them even remotely to support quitting, or just even understanding more of what would help them to quit? So we have about 25 ancillary studies in the pipeline. There's an online proposal process, and that's available through our website. And this is, a little bit of a busy but hopefully colorful slide that really is meant to say that we review, and there's many steps to doing an ancillary study, but the most important of these two, the RAC review and PAC review, one of which is our research advisory committee review, but that has equal weight to our community advisory board, which we call our PRIDEnet advisory committee. They have equal weight to the research committee. So in terms of saying this is not something that we want to be involved in, or please revise it in this way, and making sure that the researchers have really thought about what the community's role is going to be in every step of the process. So these are some of the examples. I won't go through all of these, but you can explore them on our website. They're pretty diverse, and even though we have just 16 papers published thus far, there's many more right now under review and even more under development. You can also see that at our website, like which of our ancillary studies are active and where they're at in the process. And looking ahead, we're really thinking about, gosh, how do we continue this for 30 years? How do we retain folks in a way that feels good and exciting, interesting to our population? How do we deliver more value? So how do we get the insights from the PRIDE study back to people? So it's not just, again, this transactional, oh, give me your survey data, but how else can we support people in achieving optimal health? And then, as I've mentioned, biospecimen collection. Some other pieces that we're thinking about is, the digital world is complicated out there, and how do we know that somebody you know, who says they're Juno in the back end, you know, that they really are, and does that matter, and how does that matter, you know? So how does that differ, for example, than, you know, doing an in-person study in a medical institution, and how do we make sure that we're collecting insights with veracity that we need? Also, you know, there's only so much that we can get around certain health experiences from individuals, and there may be another place of, you know, connecting with electronic medical records, or what we call chart adjudication. So if somebody, you know, has a stroke, understanding, you know, kind of what led to that, and their lab values, their imaging values, all of these kinds of things, and then data linkage between our study, other studies, electronic medical records, etc. So there's a lot of really exciting things, especially as the field develops and technology develops. So I hope that from this talk you will take home some of these points. Sexual and gender minority people are an underserved, understudied population that is vulnerable to poor health, with notable health and healthcare inequities. And we at the PRIDE study really work to involve, you know, marry essentially comprehensive data collection, such that we can try to understand and serve that community. And we do that primarily through our annual questionnaire, as well as investigator proposed ancillary studies. We do that by trying to ensure community engagement in all parts of the research process. So not just, you know, filling out a survey, but research question generation, analysis, dissemination, both within and beyond the PRIDE study. Mobile and digital technologies are efficient ways to recruit to research studies, and that we hope that we're contributing to ensuring LGBTQ+ visibility and health equity. And doing that means including LGBTQ+ people and their experiences in all research going forward. So, you know, you can really help by joining the PRIDE study, but also if you are involved in research, if you're involved in healthcare, making sure LGBTQ+ people are on your mind in all of those aspects of data collection. You know, make the PRIDE study obsolete. Why do we need a separate study when, if every single other study really involved LGBTQ+ people front and center? So these efforts are not just, you know, me and Mitch, as I've mentioned. There's a lot of people who are involved in the study in terms of staff and teams. So these are some of the incredible folks. There's also many students, trainees, and other collaborating investigators in our lab. And if you have any questions about this study, or, you know, being involved, research questions or ideas, or want to see more just about the research, you can please check out our website. It is down right at the moment for technical issues, but we will be back up soon. So you can still join our mailing list. And if you can, I would appreciate if people fill out an evaluation. I can maybe put that in the chat. I don't know. We'll work on that, but we'll go to Q&A now, and we'll see if we can put that tiny URL in the chat. Thank you so much for your kind attention.
Thank you so much, Juno. I'll go ahead and give you the round of applause that I'm sure you'd be receiving if we were all eating lunch and enjoying each other's company in an auditorium somewhere right now. That was a really fantastic talk, and I really appreciate you coming back to WashU. I know there's a lot of people on here that probably are happy to see you back and see some of the updates that y'all have been working on. You know, the points I think that are universal for if anyone is doing kind of community grounded research. I think there's just a lot of amazing lessons to take away from the fantastic work that y'all are doing. See, we've got one question in the chat so far, which is how much support does Stanford give you / partners that have allowed for ongoing growth?
Yeah, thank you for that. Stanford has been incredible. You know, I think I can't speak enough to the fact that, you know, I moved, Mitch and I moved the home base of the PRIDE study to Stanford in 2019. And that's because we were able to be part of a larger project. So what we're building at Stanford is an LGBTQ plus health program with 4 main pillars. So clinical care, research, education, and advocacy. And so the PRIDE study is actually just one project within the research kind of pillar. And so being at Stanford, there has been a really strong commitment from the dean, the school as a whole, and from our chairs to support that program. And so we have a dedicated clinic, primary care providers, sort of a clinical home, and we're working to kind of connect all the specialties into that in terms of research, really supporting our lab, me and Mitch, giving us, supportive money to basically like start things and bridge until, other grants come in and those types of things, administrative support in terms of education, looking at comprehensive education, not just for med students, fellows, residents, et cetera, but also, everybody who's involved in clinical care and research, and then advocacy. We're not there yet, and this program is very new, so I don't want to oversell it. We're in the build phase, but then there is this idea of like all of these efforts need to not just be at Stanford. How do we influence and support the processes at other institutions, but also policy and these types of things. So I can't say enough about how supported I feel, and the program is at Stanford, and it's been really a fantastic place.
That's great to hear. Let's see. There's another question. I know you mentioned this briefly. Someone asked any thought of extending the study to include high school age participants. I know you said that's something that y'all are looking into, right?
Sorry, say that again. High school aged?
Yeah, high school age.
Yeah, absolutely. We do want to. Actually, we would like to go, down to either 12 or 13. There's some challenges and opportunities there. 13 to 18-year-olds are not just, younger or smaller adults in essence. We really need to think carefully with folks who are experts in adolescent health. How do we ask these questions? What's relevant? What's not relevant? These kinds of concerns and considerations. And so that has not yet happened, as well as things like just consent, to participate. And so working with our IRB and other pieces. So it's been something on the mind, but is not yet happened, but something we'd like to see in the future.
Cool. And I would greatly anticipate seeing those results. I think they'd be really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's one question, I may have missed it, but how do y'all recruit participants? How broad nationwide is participation? And I definitely remember seeing PRIDE study booths at GLAMA conferences and all sorts of events. So I know y'all's reach is far and wide. We need to get some PRIDE study white coat pins at WashU, I think.
Cool. Yeah, absolutely. So we are national and we have participation from every state. It's not, equal, but it is actually, last I looked, I think our strongest participation, we had a lot of participation in the South, which people are often, surprised at, but certainly on the coasts. And I think lowest was in the Midwest most recently, but do have every state. So this is something that I can ask all of you. We want, please tell everyone, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We have all of those, and retweeting us, sharing, and getting people participating is how we grow this effort. And it's, free to obviously join. And also, if you are not comfortable joining, but are interested or aren't eligible to join, you can join our newsletter and just hear about, our research and other things. So we do all kinds of other things like PRIDEnet cafes once a month, where we have discussions about various topics. We had, sort of a creative writing retreat for LGBTQ plus folks. We had various other like self-care things, especially, throughout COVID, we've been thinking about, how can we support folks in other ways? It's not just obviously about medical and research insights.
And let's see, one question is, what are some of the direct changes you've seen on your medical campus as a result of the advocacy, research, and other work that you've done?
Yeah, so I'm still relatively new to Stanford. So when we came, there was a lot of a lot of support for bringing us. But I think what I've started to see is the more that we talk about it and do education about what we're doing, language shifts are a big thing, so I see people, including pronouns more in email signatures, introducing themselves with pronouns on at meetings, saying, oh, hey, maybe I should ask about sexual orientation and gender identity in this lung study or in this kidney study, not just because it's about sex or HIV or these other things, people starting to use language like pregnant person instead of pregnant woman. So I think language is profound because it says, the people are thinking about it and applying it into their everyday use. But there are some very simple things that people can do, like email signatures and really thinking in your domain of work, whatever that is, how are we thinking about LGBTQ plus people? So if you're in HR, gosh, what are your parental leave benefits? Are they including LGBTQ plus families? If you are a business administrator, what does that look like in terms of your onboarding of new people? Or in the billing department, are people comfortable thinking about, gosh, somebody might have a legal name, but what is their correct name to use? And how do we put that in their charts and throughout? So in every single domain, we need to be thinking about these questions.
Fantastic. Well, we are pushing right up against the 1 o'clock mark. And I know there's some questions that we couldn't get to, and I apologize for that. But I really, really want to thank, Juno. I want to thank all the attendees. We appreciate everyone coming. Reminder that there will be an email coming out about pronoun pins and rainbow pins and all sorts of things. If you are a member of the community, please sign up for the Pride study. I've been a member for many years, and it's great. It's a good time. So join up with us. And but thank you to everyone who has been coming to LGBTQ Health Month. The whole program for our first year, I think, has gone really well, and it wouldn't be possible without all of the organizations that have helped support us, as well as all of our wonderful participants, and of course our lovely speakers. So thank you, everyone, and I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon.
Great. Thank you so much. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.